What unfolded under the bright lights of Singapore left the entire Formula One world speechless. Ferrari made a strategy call so baffling, so unacceptable, that both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc couldn't hold back their fury. You could hear the frustration in their voices, see the anger in their body language, and feel the tension radiating from the garage. How did Ferrari get it so wrong on one of the most demanding circuits of the season? And what does this mean for the already fragile relationship between their star drivers and the team? Stay tuned until the very last second, because the full story behind this meltdown is one you absolutely can't miss. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc are boiling with a kind of fury that has shaken the foundations of Ferrari, their frustration spilling into the open in a way that could no longer be disguised or softened. The Marina Bay weekend was supposed to serve as a revival for the Scuderia, a chance to demonstrate strength, discipline, and a renewed sense of competitiveness against their rivals. Instead, it turned into a spectacle of errors, indecision, and disorganization that left both drivers humiliated and visibly enraged. What unfolded beneath the dazzling lights of Singapore was not just another strategy miscalculation or operational stumble. It was the collapse of a fragile trust between two of the sport's most ambitious drivers and the team that promised them glory but continues to deliver heartbreak. Hamilton arrived in Singapore looking sharper, hungrier, and more energized than he had in months. There was a confidence radiating from him in every practice session, a body language that spoke of belief, a rhythm that suggested he was ready to fight at the sharp end once again. His laps were measured yet aggressive, his communication with the engineers precise, as though every detail mattered in this pursuit of redemption. For him, this was the weekend to finally silence the doubts and prove that Ferrari could support his ambitions. Yet, when the defining moment arrived in qualifying, all of that optimism was crushed in the most agonizing way possible. The seven-time champion found himself immobilized at the pit exit, his car stationary, engine off, with precious seconds slipping through his fingers as his tires cooled and his focus was shattered. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Every passing heartbeat drained the performance from the car, every delay stripping him of the momentum he had carefully built. By the time Ferrari released him, the damage was irreversible. His tires had lost their bite, the rhythm of his lap was gone, and the opportunity for a front-row challenge evaporated before his eyes. At a track as merciless as Singapore, where overtaking is a monumental task and tire temperatures dictate lap times with brutal precision, this kind of blunder was unforgivable. His voice on the radio was laced with venom, disbelief dripping from every syllable as he demanded an explanation that never truly came. What made the outburst even more cutting was the comparison he drew with Mercedes, his former team. There, he reminded them, the basics were never mishandled, the fundamentals were executed with flawless consistency. At Ferrari, by contrast, these same errors repeat themselves with almost ritualistic regularity, undermining everything their drivers attempt to build on track. For Hamilton, this was not just a mistake, it was an insult to his stature, a betrayal of his trust, and a symbol of the amateurish culture he can no longer stomach. Leclerc, though often more restrained in public, mirrored Hamilton's frustration with a ferocity that matched the occasion. His session was riddled with poor timing, laps compromised by traffic, and instructions that left him stranded without a clear strategy. His expression in the garage told the story. Shoulders slumped, jaw tightened, eyes heavy with the weight of years spent enduring the same cycle of errors. When he finally spoke, his tone was sharp, his words laced with the bitterness of a man who has given everything to the cause only to watch it dismantled time and again by those meant to guide him. The garage atmosphere became suffocating. Mechanics avoided the gaze of their drivers, engineers whispered nervously, and the usual energy that surrounds Ferrari at a race weekend dissolved into silence and discomfort. Even the tifosi could feel the rupture. The body language of their heroes told them everything. This was not a single blunder that could be forgiven in the heat of battle. It was the continuation of a damaging pattern, one that has corroded the credibility of the team and eroded the patience of the men risking everything in the cockpit. For Hamilton, the experience cut especially deep. He did not leave Mercedes and come to Ferrari to relive the agony of squandered potential. He arrived to chase glory, to write another chapter in his legendary career by lifting one of motorsport's most iconic names back to the summit. Instead, he finds himself trapped in a cycle of incompetence, his greatness compromised by decisions so clumsy they border on incomprehensible. For Leclerc, the weight is even heavier. Years of loyalty now threatened by the realization that his prime years may be slipping away in a haze of missed opportunities and flawed strategies. The anger that poured out in Singapore was not temporary, nor was it a passing display of frustration. It was the eruption of a deeper problem, a breakdown in trust, a fracture in the bond between drivers and team, a dangerous signal that the very foundation of Ferrari's competitive spirit is crumbling. The tifosi, who have endured disappointment for too long, witnessed in real time the fury of their champions boiling over into open rebellion. Singapore will not be remembered for who stood on the podium, but for the moment Ferrari's weaknesses were exposed under the harshest possible light, when Hamilton and Leclerc, united in rage, made it clear that they will no longer tolerate being let down in this way. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Their anger was more than emotional. It was a warning, a declaration that unless something changes within the team, Ferrari risks not only losing races, but losing the faith and loyalty of the very drivers who embody its hopes for redemption. On the opposite end of the Ferrari garage, Charles Leclerc's frustration exploded with a ferocity that could not be disguised, a torrent of raw emotion unleashed after a qualifying session that had felt like wrestling with a machine possessed. From the very first laps, it became apparent that the SF-25 was not a precision-crafted racing car but a restless beast that fought against him at every input. Each corner was a gamble, each braking zone a risk, each acceleration a desperate attempt to keep control of something that refused to obey. The steering felt twitchy, the balance vanished without warning, and the car's nervous movements made it behave more like a weapon against him than a tool to fight his rivals. By the time the final runs ended, the pressure that had been building inside him boiled over in an uncontrollable eruption. He slammed his fists against the steering wheel with violent force, his helmet jerking in disbelief, before unleashing a guttural roar over the radio that carried both fury and despair. This was more than anger. It was humiliation of the cruelest kind. To end up seventh on a circuit where grid position dictates everything felt like a sentence to mediocrity. He understood immediately what it meant. No path to victory, no realistic chance of even a podium, just a long and punishing afternoon spent inhaling the exhaust of Mercedes, McLaren, and Aston Martin while rivals disappeared up the road. For a man who has carried Ferrari's hopes through years of frustration, who has been forced time and again to disguise his disappointment with resilience, the realization cut him to the core. It was another reminder that no matter how much he gave, the team around him continued to falter at the decisive moments. The scene inside the Ferrari garage turned suffocating, heavy with silence and tension. Engineers hid behind their monitors, avoiding the eyes of the drivers. Mechanics moved with mechanical detachment, pretending to be busy while the echo of radio messages from both Leclerc and Hamilton rang in everyone's ears. The outbursts were not just complaints, they were damning verdicts broadcast live for the world to hear. Across the globe, supporters erupted with rage, flooding social networks with condemnation, questioning leadership, and demanding accountability from a team that has lived on its reputation for too long. Analysts sharpened their critiques, describing Ferrari's execution as disorganized, archaic, and unworthy of the legendary name it carries. Rival teams, watching from their pit walls, exchanged glances of disbelief. Even those accustomed to Ferrari's collapses seemed astonished at just how chaotic the operation had become. For both Hamilton and Leclerc, this disaster was not an isolated incident. It was confirmation of something far more corrosive. It was proof that Ferrari's oldest flaws, the same weaknesses that have haunted the Scuderia for over a decade, remain deeply rooted and ready to surface whenever the stakes are highest. Each misjudged call, each failed upgrade, each overlooked detail builds into a chain of failures that drags the team down, no matter the talent behind the wheel. For drivers of their caliber, who came into this season believing in a project, believing they could turn Ferrari into a championship contender again, the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. The trust between driver and team, fragile and precious, cracked under the weight of yet another setback. What unfolded was not just a bad qualifying session, it was a portrait of a team imploding. Two of the finest drivers on the grid, men capable of brilliance, reduced to pounding cockpits and screaming through radios because the cars they were given betrayed them at the very moment they needed support. The frustration of the drivers mirrored the despair of millions of tifosi who once again saw their faith broken, their optimism shattered, their dreams of resurgence crumbling into dust. Inside the garage, the unity that is essential for progress appeared to fracture, poisoned by mistrust, disappointment, and the haunting suspicion that nothing was truly changing. As the hours tick toward the race, the consequences hang heavy in the air. Ferrari stands on the precipice of yet another wasted season, another chapter in a saga defined not by triumph but by collapse. The anger of Leclerc and Hamilton is not simply an emotional reaction, it is a desperate alarm, a cry that unless transformation arrives immediately and decisively, all hope will evaporate. The dreams of revival, the promises of redemption, the belief that the Scuderia could rise again, are all at risk of vanishing, consumed by the same cycle of mistakes that has haunted Ferrari for far too long. And as the world prepares to watch them line up on the grid, one reality remains painfully clear. If change does not come now, the downfall will not just continue, it will become permanent. The collapse carried a sting that was far harsher than anyone in red could bear, because the lead-up had painted a picture of promise that felt believable, even intoxicating. In the build-up to qualifying, the signs had suggested Ferrari were not just present, but genuinely threatening. The practice sessions created an illusion of progress that felt tangible. The car did not dominate in raw pace, yet it carried enough speed and stability to make the entire paddock pause and take notice. For a team that has suffered under the weight of its own mistakes for years, that small glimmer was enough to ignite hope. Inside the garage, there was a different electricity, as if mechanics, engineers, and even the drivers could sense something shifting, something aligning. Lewis Hamilton, still adjusting to the scarlet environment yet wearing the composure of a champion, spoke with rare certainty. His voice betrayed no hesitation, only conviction. He insisted he felt sharp, alive behind the wheel, confident that the machine beneath him could deliver a lap worthy of the front row. His belief carried weight, because when Hamilton speaks with that tone, the entire paddock listens. On the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc reinforced the mood with his own flashes of brilliance. In the opening practice session, he was lively, aggressive, throwing the car through the narrow streets of Marina Bay with a rhythm that looked polished and effortless. Observers leaned forward. Fans dared to whisper to themselves that this weekend might finally be different, that Ferrari might, at long last, turn potential into reality. But then qualifying arrived, and the optimism shattered. Hamilton's downfall was not quiet or hidden. It unfolded under the unforgiving glare of the paddock, every detail visible to rivals, journalists, and millions watching. In Q3, at the very moment precision and timing mattered most, Ferrari left their superstar stranded in the garage. Seconds ticked away while his tires, once primed, bled away the crucial heat needed for grip. Singapore punishes the unprepared, and tire temperature management is non-negotiable. When they finally released him, the effort was already ruined. He rolled out with rubber that was stone cold, and in these humid, punishing conditions, that meant disaster. The lap that followed was a hollow exercise, stripped of competitiveness before it had even begun. Over the radio, Hamilton's voice emerged sharp and cutting, the sound of disbelief turning into frustration that echoed far beyond the cockpit. It was a piercing reminder of what he had left behind. At Mercedes, such errors never made it past the planning stage. At Ferrari, they had unfolded in real time, on the most critical stage of the weekend. Leclerc's suffering was of a different breed but no less painful. His anger was aimed not at strategy, but at the very heart of the machine. After the opening practice, Ferrari's engineers, gripped by anxiety over plank wear, made what they believed was a protective adjustment, raising the ride height. It may have been a conservative move, but it came at a devastating price. With that decision, the balance of the SF-25 evaporated. The car transformed from something precise and stable into a nervous, unpredictable beast. It twitched on corner entry, slid unexpectedly through the middle of turns, and refused to inspire confidence on exit. For a driver like Leclerc, who thrives on rhythm and trust in his car, this shift was catastrophic. He admitted later that the Ferrari no longer felt like the same machine he had driven on Friday morning. What had once felt lively and sharp became a fight for survival, a car that needed constant corrections rather than bold, confident attacks. By the time he reached qualifying, the problems had snowballed into something unmanageable. Instead of throwing the car at the circuit with aggression, he was left clinging to control, fighting to keep it between the barriers. His frustration seeped through every gesture as he climbed out of the cockpit, his words laced with disappointment and restrained fury. For those watching, the collapse was almost cruel in its precision. Ferrari had dangled hope in front of their supporters, shown glimpses of a resurgence, and then, in the space of a single session, obliterated it with a combination of poor strategy and flawed engineering decisions. Hamilton had been robbed of a chance to demonstrate the very reason Ferrari signed him. Leclerc had been handed a machine so compromised it betrayed him in the moment of truth. The echoes of past failures rang louder than ever, and for fans who had allowed themselves to dream, the sting was unbearable. Rivals looked on with a mix of sympathy and disbelief, and across social media, the outrage and heartbreak of Ferrari's global fanbase filled every corner of the conversation. Once again, a weekend that began with excitement ended in despair, leaving the haunting question that lingers after so many Ferrari missteps. How much longer can this cycle continue before something truly breaks? The spectacle in Singapore unfolded with a cruelty that felt almost scripted, as though destiny itself had chosen to shine a blinding spotlight on Ferrari's frailties while elevating Mercedes in the most public, unforgiving way possible. The Marina Bay circuit, notorious for its relentless bumps, stifling humidity, and furnace-like heat that punishes even the smallest mechanical weakness, was supposed to expose Mercedes. Pundits had predicted struggle, fatigue, and instability for the Silver Arrows. Instead, they delivered a masterclass in resilience and precision. George Russell seized pole position with a lap so immaculate that it stunned rivals into silence, showcasing the unshakable discipline and order that have defined Mercedes for more than a decade. Their engineers executed like surgeons, their strategists read the track like an open book, and their driver delivered with the confidence of a man who knew his team would never leave him exposed. The paddock buzzed with admiration as Russell stood atop the timing sheets, a symbol of a team that, regardless of circumstance, never forgets how to get the essentials right. In stark opposition stood Ferrari, a team drowning in contradictions. Once the proud emblem of Formula One heritage, they were left languishing with their cars stranded in the anonymous mediocrity of 6th and 7th. This was not misfortune, it was confirmation of a deeper sickness. For Lewis Hamilton, the sight was unbearable. He had once led Mercedes to heights few thought possible, guided by an organization that valued discipline above all, a group that understood that championships are built on fundamentals rather than flashes of brilliance. Now he finds himself wearing red, fighting within an environment where those fundamentals constantly slip through their fingers. He could barely hide his despair, because the contrast with his former team was as cruel as it was obvious. Mercedes thrives on clarity and structure, while Ferrari appears trapped in a spiral of confusion and missed opportunities. Each misstep is another reminder of what he left behind. For Charles Leclerc, the agony was not just professional but deeply personal. His devotion to Ferrari has been unwavering, rooted in a sense of loyalty and identity, yet what has that commitment brought him? Frustration layered upon disappointment, heartbreak upon humiliation. He has given the team his trust, his youth, his best performances, only to watch their rivals grow stronger while he remains shackled to a machine that betrays him at the decisive moment. The sight of Russell celebrating was salt in the wound, a reminder that elsewhere, discipline and execution create triumph, while at Ferrari, loyalty is rewarded with despair. His every gesture radiated frustration, his shoulders tight, his eyes darkened by the weight of promises unfulfilled. Beyond the track, the outrage detonated like an explosion across the digital world. Social media platforms drowned in fury, fans unleashing a torrent of condemnation that cut through the night louder than any engine. They slammed the pit wall for abandoning Hamilton on tires that had no life left, calling it a decision that bordered on sabotage. They tore into the failure to provide Leclerc with machinery capable of holding itself together under even modest pressure. Everywhere, the consensus was the same. Ferrari had once again squandered the extraordinary gifts of two world-class drivers. The tone was not just critical but venomous, as though the fans had finally reached the point where heartbreak had transformed into open rebellion. They demanded resignations, demanded accountability, demanded change. Then came Frederic Vasseur, stepping before microphones to defend the indefensible. His words, rather than healing wounds, acted like accelerant on a raging fire. He cited the unpredictable evolution of the track, blaming grip levels and shifting conditions for their miscalculations. But the audience wasn't buying it. To commentators, to fans, to even neutral observers, the excuse rang hollow. This was not the story of a team caught out by bad fortune. It was a team undone by its own inability to execute the basics. The backlash grew louder with every passing moment, as people recognized that Ferrari's response wasn't ownership of failure, but another chapter in a long history of empty rationalizations. Hamilton, seasoned by years of dominance and forged within the standards of a team that tolerated nothing less than perfection, would not let that narrative stand. His dismissal was swift, precise, and cutting. This was not about changing grip levels, he insisted. This was not about track evolution. This was about catastrophic decision-making at its most glaring. His tone carried the weight of experience, the authority of someone who knows exactly what championship-winning execution looks like, and Ferrari's performance was the polar opposite. His voice left no doubt. The problem was not the circuit but the team itself. Leclerc, stripped of patience, refused to play diplomat. His honesty was brutal, his assessment scathing. He made it clear that the last-minute setup alterations had sabotaged his car, leaving him fighting machinery that no longer obeyed him. There was no careful phrasing, no attempt to soften the blow. He declared openly that the changes had crippled the balance, shattered his confidence, and destroyed his ability to compete. His words carried pain but also fury, the fury of a driver watching his chance evaporate because of errors made not by fate but by those supposed to support him. No clever explanation could mask the reality. The car was broken, and it was broken because of decisions made inside the garage. The fallout spread quickly. Analysts dissected every move, their commentary a blend of disbelief and resignation, questioning how Ferrari could repeat the same mistakes year after year. Fans, their patience long eroded, turned their frustration into a collective roar that reverberated across every corner of the sport. For Hamilton, the nightmare was reliving the bitter contrast between past certainty and present chaos. For Leclerc, it was the devastating realization that his loyalty might be chaining him to a future of endless disappointment. And for Ferrari, the weekend became more than a failure. It became a symbol, a grim reflection of a team whose glorious legacy has been overshadowed by an unrelenting cycle of errors and excuses that no longer satisfy anyone watching. The wider perspective makes Ferrari's collapse all the more painful, a disaster that carries weight far beyond a single race weekend. Lewis Hamilton, who had turned his back on Mercedes in pursuit of something bigger than himself, a legacy-defining rebirth in red, finds himself shackled to the same turbulence that has haunted Maranello for decades. He was promised reinvention, a new chapter of dominance, the chance to lead the most storied team in motorsport back to glory. Instead, he faces the same old demons: confusion in the strategy room, indecision at critical moments, execution that borders on amateur. At the very same time, the team he abandoned continues to thrive with cold precision, orchestrating perfect laps and celebrating achievements that once belonged to him. For Hamilton, every celebration in silver and black is a cruel reminder of the world he left behind, every mistake in scarlet a bitter confirmation that his gamble may have been misguided. The flicker in his eyes, the stiff posture after qualifying, the silence that lingers in interviews, it all reveals a man wrestling with the thought that he might have traded certainty for chaos, traded mastery for mayhem, traded destiny for disappointment. Charles Leclerc, the driver Ferrari once elevated as the beacon of their future, the embodiment of hope and loyalty, now finds himself caught in a storm of frustration he can no longer hide. His voice crackles with fury on the team radio, sharp words cutting through the static like blades. His tone carries no restraint, his messages broadcast not just to his engineers but to the entire paddock, a declaration that his patience is burning away. His gestures in the garage, the icy stares at the pit wall, the clipped answers to media questions all paint the picture of a man reaching the edge of tolerance. Once embraced as the crown jewel of Ferrari's long-term plan, he now appears to be suffocating under the weight of a team that repeatedly fails to match his ambition. Around the paddock, whispers grow louder, rival teams exchange knowing looks, competitors grin quietly as they watch Ferrari implode under its own contradictions. For the Tifosi, whose devotion borders on religious faith, the sting is unbearable. They travel from all corners of the globe, drenched in passion, draped in red, only to endure heartbreak that feels endless. Their love for Ferrari is unconditional, yet that love is met with betrayal that grows more unbearable with every misstep. Singapore should have been a chance to shine, but finishing 6th and 7th on a circuit where qualifying is everything, where overtaking is a near impossibility, feels like an insult rather than a mere failure. It was not defeat delivered by superior machinery. It was the product of self-sabotage. The team managed to ruin its own race before the lights even blinked green. For Hamilton, such incompetence must feel like being stabbed in the back by the very institution he chose to believe in. For Leclerc, it is a nightmare unfolding in slow motion, each wasted lap a reminder that his immense talent risks being squandered in the wrong environment. For the fans, it is humiliation, a wound that cuts deeper with every year of false promises. And when Frederic Vasseur steps in front of the microphones, his calm, calculated reassurances sound like empty echoes, void of conviction, stripped of credibility. Words meant to inspire now only deepen the sense of futility. The convergence of Hamilton's despair, Leclerc's visible rage, the fans' devastation, and leadership's hollow explanations leaves only one possible conclusion. Ferrari continues to advertise revolution yet delivers ruin. Under the glow of the Marina Bay lights, the truth could not be more exposed. This was supposed to be a night of redemption, a stage for glory under the stars, but instead it has become a showcase of anguish. Unless something extraordinary happens, this Grand Prix will not be etched in memory as triumph but as tragedy, not as renewal but as betrayal. It will be remembered as the weekend when Hamilton's bold move appeared like a miscalculation, when Leclerc's devotion seemed to fracture beyond repair, and when Ferrari proved, once again, that its most dangerous enemy does not sit on the rival pit wall but resides deep within its own house, a shadow it has never been able to conquer.